The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live, to this very special parent-to-parent talk. I'm Shannon Penrod, so thrilled to be with you guys. I hope that all of you here in the United States had a happy and safe 4th of July. I don't know what it was like in your neighborhood, but in my neighborhood where fireworks are not allowed, it was off the charts. So we're all a little sleep deprived this morning. But, you know, I don't think that I didn't hear any ambulances, so let's hope that everybody was okay. And no fire trucks, because I think that's the thing that I worry about more than anything else, a bunch of wood structures, and let's set the whole neighborhood aflame with fireworks. I'm a firework fan, but only when they're done by professionals. You know what I'm saying? So thrilled that you guys are here with us, though. I hope that at some point over the weekend, you got a minute to just be and appreciate, and whether you were here in the United States or other places, to just have a minute of downtime, because we love that. But today is July 5th. We are live right now, 2023, and yes, sounded like bombs all night. You know what? And I saw posts that everybody was doing yesterday about be considerate because not everyone can handle the sounds. I don't know about you guys, but my dogs were so unhappy about the whole thing. And I know many military veterans who have a really hard time. And of course, for individuals on the spectrum, it can be really, really overwhelming. So I hope you guys got through it okay. We'll all be a little sleep deprived today, but then hopefully there will be less of it tonight. I know there will still be that for a couple of days in my neighborhood, honestly. But we've got a lot that we're going to talk about today. In just a few minutes, I'm going to be giving you my top 10 life skills that it's summer. And so now is a great time to be teaching life skills to our teens. And I want to say this, I said it was for teens, but you know, if you have adult children that you know, go through the list, because everything that is on this list has like a sliding scale of where you start and, you know, like the complete skill. So you can be teaching it at any point. There's ways that there's things on there that I could be doing better, right? But also, if you don't have a teenager, it's okay. I hope you won't go, oh no, this isn't for me, because some of these things you can start teaching before the teen years and should start teaching before the teen years, but these are absolutely essential that we make sure that our teenagers have these skills. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Before we do that, I want to remind you that we're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and a dozen other sites. Our fabulous Traven is going to show those to you in just a second on the screen. So you can be writing in, somebody is writing in to me already on Facebook, and when you write in on any like Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, it automatically shows up here on my screen, and then you and I can be having a conversation with everybody, right? I do want to remind you that we've been off for a couple of days, so we've been showing you some best of, and we're going to continue doing that tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to show you one of our best of Autism Lives. I love some of the comments that you guys wrote in over the weekend, because these are oldies but goodies, right? Then I want to remind you also that next week we are back live. We didn't get to do an Ask Dr. Doreen yesterday because it was 4th of July, but we will be live with Dr. Doreen next Tuesday. We want to remind you that her podcast is now available as its own podcast. Ask Dr. Doreen, which you can, we hope that you will sign up and subscribe. We also hope very soon it will be available as an app on, so that will be really fun. But you can find the podcast right now on Spotify. You can ask your questions for Ask Dr. Doreen at askdrdoreen.com. There is a place where it says contact, and you can put all the information in there. And we're hoping that you will leave reviews on Apple Podcasts right now for Autism Live, and very soon for Ask Dr. Doreen. In fact, we're going to be having a contest about that, more about that next week as that all becomes available. But do check out all of that, because we don't want you to miss your Ask Dr. Doreen. Okay. Anything else that I want to share? I want to go through, we're going to do what we do now with these top 10. I'm going to go through them rapid fire, and not really explain all of them. But then I encourage you to watch the full video later on where I will go through, because if you might, let's say you have a 13-year-old and you're like, Shannon, I haven't started any of these things. That's okay, don't panic, right? You've got plenty of time. But how you're gonna start to teach maybe a 13-year-old who's nonverbal these skills is gonna be very different than if you have a 19-year-old who's got a bunch of skills and you're just doing some of the more advanced stuff, or you're filling in some of the gaps, right? So there's a continuum for all of these skills, and it is not one size fits all, which is what our next screen says. We want to make sure that we're setting everybody up for success. And is this the right one? Do we have the right one? I don't feel like that's the second slide. Yeah, I think so. I think this was the other. Hang on one second, you guys. We think we've confused the two last week in this one. But what this second slide is supposed to say is that it's not one size fits all. That each one of our teens is very, very different, and that's why there is this continuum, and that you really got to ask yourself, what does my teen need, and where are they right now? What skills do they have? Where do I want to start teaching? And we're going to go through this a little bit more granularly when we do the longer version. But I do want to give the disclaimer that the quick one here as we go through, there's a whole world of things for each one of these things that you can teach, right? Because our teens, it's funny because people always say, why does it always seem cookie cutter when we're talking about a 3-year-old on the spectrum? And it isn't cookie cutter. Each child is individual. It's just that there are a whole bunch of things that all 3-year-olds need to learn, right? But by the time you get to be a teen, it's very specific, and it gets more specific the older they get. So, thank you, Traven. So it's not one size fits all. This is what I was talking about. What's important to your teen, right? And you might go through this list and go, you know what, Shannon, we've got 6 of these really solid. I hope you'll stay tuned for when I talk about how to really expand upon the skill, because maybe there's some things you can add. But if there aren't, do the 4 that you don't have solid, right? Because if somebody has all 10 of these really well, they're going to function no matter where they are, no matter what's going on. Okay, so that's my little disclaimer. But let's get started on the rapid fire. What are the top 10 things that I think that all of our teenagers need to learn? Okay, number 1, super important, how to ask for help. This is absolutely critical, right? And there's a sliding scale for this. Number 2, who to ask for help. Because if you ask the wrong people for help, you could ask for help all day long and it's not going to get you help, right? So let's talk about who those people are. Number 3, my mother started, she taught every single person in the family how to cook 3 meals. Now, this can be very basic or it can be cordon bleu, right? But if they know how to cook 3 meals, they're going to get through the week just fine. Number 4, how to do laundry. Again, a sliding scale of what you're doing, but how to basically do laundry. Number 5, how to call someone. This can be a very complex skill, so stay with us for that. Number 6, how to pay for things. Again, it can be very easy, but can get much more complex. Number 7, how and when to disclose their diagnosis. Critical, could be life-saving. Number 8, how to order food. Number 9, how to use transportation. And number 10, I think perhaps the most important one on the list, how to say no. Because that is a critical life skill. All right, so those are my basic 10. Let's go back and talk about these in detail and about this sliding scale that I keep referring to. So if we go to the first one, and there we go. I didn't know if you were going to do it for me. Thank you, Traven. Okay, so it's still, remember, it's not one size fits all. This is going to be different for everybody. So let's look at that for each one of these. So how to ask for help. So imagine that you are, let's start with teenagers, right? Because that's what we're talking about. Imagine that you're 13, and how do you ask for help? It's going to change a lot from the time that you're 13 maybe to the time that you're 26 years old. So this is a very different skill for different people. And if you're verbal or you're nonverbal, or if you're somebody who has panic attacks, right? But this is a really important skill to teach our kids. So start with where your teenager is. And again, you can start a 3-year-old with this. You can start a 2-year-old with this, how to ask for help. This can be a sign language help. I don't know, there's a thing that they were teaching for a lot of years, which is if somebody hits somebody lightly with a fist with a thumb out, that suggests that they need help. So that if a child is somewhere, I mean, the most horrible thing in the world, that they're abducted, that if you teach a child, you hit someone with your fist and hold up your thumb, that I don't know that everybody knows that, but I think it's an important thing to teach your child, that is a way that they can ask for help. But start with you. How do they ask you for help? How would you like them to ask for help? Is your child able to verbalize the word help, or do they need to sign it? And I would teach them a plethora of skills, because the people that we're going to talk about, who do you ask for help in a second, but everybody doesn't always recognize when somebody asks for help. I remember being in social psychology in college and them talking about the Kitty Genovese case where she screamed for help and people who could hear and see stood by and did nothing. Because we have this thing that when somebody just says help, 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 people don't often respond, right? So we're going to talk about in the next slide about who specifically asked to ask for help, but it is all about how to ask for help, right? That sometimes you have, I felt that it was important to teach my son that when you're asking for help, be specific. Don't just say help, point to somebody and say help, and you could say, please help me, right? Because science shows that if you point at someone, you've now assigned them to be the person to help you, and people feel guilty. We will go through the list in a second about, who are the best people to pick on to do that, right? But, knowing that I don't just yell help, that I specifically ask someone, and if possible, I point to someone and say help, right? So you've got to teach your child as many different ways, your teen, your adult, as many different ways as possible about how to ask for help. That, because not everyone can hear, right? And not everyone can see, and not everyone understands sign language, and, not everybody understands the word help, right? So you want to teach them as many different ways as possible. And think about all the circumstances in life and all the different ways that you might need help, right? This means teaching them who first responders are. That this means, depending on where the person is, if they're in high school, we want to teach them how to ask for help in an email to their teachers or to their principal or to their counselor, right? We want to teach them, if they're teenagers, many insurance companies now have an app associated with their insurance, and so their health insurance. So you would want to teach them in the app how to ask for a nurse's help, or how to ask for a doctor's help, how to get an appointment, right? So you can see this becomes a big sliding scale of all the different ways and all the different phases of somebody's life that they would ask for help. When I think about, in my son's life, all the different times that I was like, oh, shoot. Like, we taught how to ask for help of a first responder, but there was a day and a time when we had to teach him how to write to his teacher and say, I did not understand the lesson. Are there any additional notes or anything that I can go look up so that I could further understand it? Or can I have more time on this assignment? Those are all ways that we teach asking for help. And we had to help him to know that in the classroom, that if he had a question, that, how to raise his hand and say, I don't understand that. How to ask for tutoring outside of class, right? Think about all the different ways and all the different times that the person that you love on the spectrum might need help and assistance. This continues on up into if you've worked through the basics and they know how to ask for first responder help, right? Then you want to figure out all the ways to ask for help at school, but then you want to look at all the things in life, like if they were having trouble with a landlord, if they're in a college dorm and if they're having trouble, how do you ask for help? What's the appropriate way to think about this? Because this is a huge life skill of how to ask for help that many of us, we wait. I'm kind of guilty of this. As I said, some of these things I need to be working on, right? that I will wait and try to figure it out myself instead of saying to somebody else, I don't really know how to do that. Or just Googling something, teaching your child when they have a question about something to Google it and go, I don't know how to do this. Maybe somebody else has done a video about it. There's so many videos in the world about how to do everything, right? My garbage disposal a couple of months ago got stuck, and I was like, oh, I really don't want to call the landlord. I really don't want to have the plumber come. I really don't want to do that. Isn't there? I Googled it, and they showed me how to fix it, and it took me 3 seconds. No wrenches, right? And I went, wow, right? So packing their backpack full of different ways, of all the different ways that you can ask for help. It's a really good life skill, and it puts them in the notion that there isn't this expectation that I'm supposed to go through my whole life and automatically know how to do things, that I can ask for help. A brilliant thing. But you can spend your whole life asking for help, and if you're asking the wrong people, it's going to get you nowhere, right? So we also have to teach who to ask for help. And for those of you who are listening in podcast on the screen right now, I have a picture of a mom with a stroller, pram, depending on where you are, with a kiddo in it. And one of the things when my son was going through ABA therapy, when they were teaching him about if you're in a store, how to ask for help, or if you're you're out in the world someplace and you don't know, they went through, okay, here are the best people to ask for help. They went through first responders, right? But then they also went through, if you're in a store, here's how to recognize who the workers are. Here's what differentiates the workers from people just in the store shopping. And I never thought about this until we had to teach it to my son. They were like, okay, at Target, typically, I don't know if they still do this, but at the time, they all wore khakis with red shirts, and they had name tags. And so they taught my son how, and then we would look at Trader Joe's. Well, Trader Joe's, they all have Hawaiian shirts on, and that's how, and they have name tags, right? At Disneyland, they wear the costume of wherever they are in the land, but they have a name tag, right? So he began to generalize, okay, this is how I find a worker, right? But if first responders aren't there and workers aren't there because you're just out in the public, who do you ask for help? And we were taught, and he was taught, you go up to a mom with small children. I never thought about this before, but if you think about it, a mom with small children, hopefully, even though they're a stranger, are going to be much more amenable to somebody asking them for help. Now, this gets a little bit harder when it's teens, because sometimes a mom with a kid, if a big teen comes up to them, may not respond well, but usually, the hope is that they will. So, and that you won't be asking somebody who's up to no good. Usually a mom with a kid in a stroller, I hate to generalize, but usually they're busy taking care of their kid. They're not up to all kinds of, horribleness. And I know that there are exceptions. It is a generalization. Hopefully it's not an overgeneralization. But, knowing who to ask for help. As a parent, I know I went through this when my son was being diagnosed, that I was like, I don't even know who to ask for help. I think that a lot of you can relate to this. It was like nobody told us which line to get in to get services for our kids. It's one of the things that I constantly rail on for our community. And I can't even tell you, oh, this is how you do it, because it's different in every state and it's different in every country, right? We haven't streamlined a process to getting help. But think about how hard it was for you to get started to help your child before you knew who to ask for help. And then let's take the time to try to teach our children to problem solve. Who would I ask for help in this situation? So again, if you've got younger kids or kids that don't have some of the more advanced skills, you want to start out by teaching them first responders, right? And I think that it's important that you take them to the facility where the first responders are. You need to set up a tour for the police department. You need to set up a visitation for the fire department, and they will let you. They will say to you, you can come on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Just know if we get a fire, you have to step aside and we will be leaving quickly and we will not be keeping the appointment. And you just kind of know that that's the drill. But let me tell you, I don't know how it is at this point in COVID, and I'm sure during COVID they probably were telling people they couldn't. But I think we're probably back enough, and they might tell you, you've got to wear a mask. But when I took my son to the fire department, it was one of the best days ever. They didn't have a fire, thank God, on the day that we went, and they fawned over him. They, put him in the jacket. They put him in the truck. He got to, steer the truck. We took pictures. It was amazing. And it changed my son's point of view about who firefighters were. And ever after that, whenever he saw firefighters, he knew that they were people who were on his side. Now, I will tell you, it was a little bit different in terms of the police, that I made the mistake of taking him to the police department during Halloween because they were having an open house and they were having this resource fair, and you could go around and you could sit in the police car, you could do all these different things, but they also had a haunted house in the jail. And I took my son in and he was terrified, just traumatized, terrified. And it wasn't even that scary. It was like Winnie the Pooh. He was still terrified because somebody was in the jail cell, and that terrified him, right? So we had to work really hard for him to not be afraid of policemen. I also think, too, we used to go to a lot of free stuff that happened in libraries around us, that they would have these magicians. Oh, I just so recommend that you look at what your library has for community events, because they would have craft things. Oh my gosh, we had such a good time. And it was all free at your local public library. But I remember once going, and there was a magician, and he said something, and he asked the kids, the kids in this audience of where we lived, and they said, give me an example of somebody you would run away from. And the kids all yelled, the cops. And I was like, oh, we live in an environment where people are afraid of the police. And I don't want to disavow of that, because sometimes the police have not been good for our kids. But we're going to talk about, how to disclose and when to disclose a little bit later on. But I do think that we have to introduce the police to our kids and introduce our kids to the police. If you happen to live someplace where they're doing a workshop with people on the autism spectrum and your police, go to that, because it's really important. And I think it's important that you tell the police your address and say, we live here, my teenager lives here and is on the autism spectrum. And, and they put that on file. And because what we have seen is when police come into a situation with teens and adults on the autism spectrum, sometimes they assume that there's drug use, and they see erratic behavior and they respond to it as if it is somebody who could do something really terrible. So I think it's important that we try to make relationships as much as possible with the police so that we don't get into that mode, right? I don't think that teaching them to be afraid of the police is the way to go, but I can certainly understand if some of you still feel that way. I don't want to take that away from you or suggest that that is not something that anybody should feel. But, I want to prevent tragedies as much as possible. And I do think that going and meeting with the police and having your child meet them and have them meet your child, teen, adult, could be a potentially life-saving thing. So back to who to ask for help. Think about this skill as you move through life. When you are at school, and let's say you're at junior high and you need help, who do you ask for? I had such a good experience when my son went to junior high, because I called ahead before the first day and said, can we come take a tour? And they said, yes. His counselor, and in junior high, everybody is assigned their own counselor. And if it's a big school, there's more than one counselor, right? And that was the case for his school. The counselor met him and took us on a tour of the school, and then had these cards that he had, and he signed his name on it, and he said to my son, this is a card for you. And basically, if you are ever anywhere, in class, anywhere, if you show this card to them and say, I need to go speak to what the gentleman's name is, it's a free pass to come to my room. He only used it once, but it was a big deal because he knew who to ask for help. If your teenager does not have someone in their junior high or high school that they know that they have that person that they can go to if they're having a sensory meltdown, if they're overwhelmed, if something has happened that they don't understand or can't, or they just need to be out, Get that for them before you go to school in the fall. I'm telling you, knowing who to ask for help, really super important in those circumstances. Now, it's important that there be a backup because sometimes that person goes out on maternity leave or is absent for the day or whatever. So I think it's important that, cultivate the relationships with the counselor, the vice principal, whoever, talk to the teachers, right? And say to your teen or adult, ask them the question, if you have a hard time at school, who do you ask for help? And make sure that they tell you at least one person and say, okay, what happens if they're not there? Who else would you ask for help? Because that's super important that they know, and it's kind of like a fire drill that it's ingrained in them. But also we want to be teaching that in any circumstance, like where they maybe have never been before. So let's say that you're at a concert and you have an issue and you don't know who to ask for help. Who might you ask for help? And if you've taught them, down the line of how do you look for a worker, how do you look for a mom with a kid, hopefully they will begin to understand that and apply that to different circumstances. But you work the step wherever your kid is right now, whatever their age is, whatever their skill level is, right? And you begin to teach this, even if you think to yourself, Shannon, there's no way that they would be able to discern who a worker is right now. That's, you say that, and I think that there are probably kids out there that is true, but they can be taught that. I've seen it happen. So start the process. And it might be a lengthy one. You might take the next 4 years having them learn, if I look for a name tag is somebody I can ask for help. But that will be a useful skill, right? Okay, so how to cook 3 meals. Now, I know that people are going to get fatoots with me about this one, like maybe this isn't the most important one, except I think that it is. I think that knowing how to cook something for yourself is really important. It is important for self-esteem, but it's also important for your life. Because, how many days can you go without food before you start to starve, right? So, and there are certain things that if somebody doesn't know, they could burn themselves, right? Now, you can start doing this when somebody is 3 years old too, with a snack. That maybe the snack is putting jam on a piece of bread. And then we're going to call that the snack, right? I remember when I was a kid, the big one that everybody was always taught was how to do ants on a log, was what it was called. And basically it's a stalk of celery with peanut butter or some nut butter on it with raisins, and they called it ants on a log. And the thing about it is that it works on fine motor skills, right? To be able to do it, and it's a tasty little treat, but it's a way for someone to be able to sustain themselves. So you can start really, really young with this, but I think it's important once you get to be a teen to think about the worker identification. I'm just reading the comment from somebody saying, I'm adding that to his goals in ABA, worker identification. So important, so important. But I also think that being able to cook yourself 3 things is really important. So when they're a teen, I think it's more important to start saying to them, and again, my mom did this with everybody in the family, to say, what's your favorite meal? What is the thing that you like to cook, that you like to eat above all else? And then let's teach you how to cook it. Now, I don't know, I don't want to oversimplify this, but I think that a lot of times the things that our kids really like aren't that hard. Now, you might have a kid, and my kid might be the exception to this. My kid is very, he's an adult now. He's very epicurious, and he has been since he was a kid. Like one of the things that we learned how to cook during the pandemic was squid ink pasta. Now, I don't think that most kids, that's where they're going to go with this, right? But if they do, if that's where their interest is, then side by side, there's a picture on the screen of a chef teaching a kiddo hand over hand how to run a pastry maker. Now, I don't think that you need to teach your kid how to make noodles unless that's what your kid wants to learn how to do, right? I think back to my nephew, my mother used to make these garlic knot rolls that my nephew just loved. And so that was one of the things that she taught him how to make so that he would know how to make that. But there are other things like teaching someone how to make pho noodles, where you just pour it's like the more advanced version of ramen. It's better for you. But, just how to heat up water and pour it into the thing and cover it up, that's cooking a meal, right? But think about all the safety issues that are involved with that. How do you heat the water up? Do you heat it up on the stove? Do you have an electric kettle? Do you heat it up in the microwave? And then what skills do we learn so that we don't burn ourselves, right? So you're not only just teaching the cooking skills, but you're also teaching nutrition and you're teaching safety, right? These are all super important things to do, because here's the crux of all this. At some point, we're not going to be here, right? I'm sorry, but that is the reality. I don't like to face it either. And I will need to eat something over it later on for having just said that. But at some point, we're not going to be here. And we want to make sure that our kids can feed ourselves and that they're happy. But think about this. This is a real way to connect with a teen or an adult. Food is a primary reinforcer. It just is. And so being able to, there's joy in cooking. There's joy in preparing food. I remember when we taught my son how to make nachos. Oh my goodness. And he doesn't do it all the time now, but he loves to make himself nachos. And we made it a little healthier so that, it's a treat, but it's still something that he could have as a meal because we put all kinds of protein in it and beans and all that stuff. And it's a good time. He makes some fabulous nachos. So you can, if they're into the food and they're into cooking, I think a lot of times parents who are like, my kid is not going to be somebody who's interested in cooking. But if you're cooking what they love, you might find that they do get interested in it. Then I also encourage you to take them to the store to buy the ingredients, because that's going to be important. It's not like if you're not there, the ingredients are not just going to show up through mentalism in their kitchen, right? But I really think, and I know that so many parents have come back to me and said, oh my gosh, it's like the new interest now. Now they want to cook all the time. And here's a little trick for those of you, and somebody, Elijah's mom had written in last week and said that her son, very quiet and unassuming, but if you turn on a camera, suddenly he wants to do a cooking lesson for everybody who's watching. And a lot of our kids are that way. So they've watched YouTube videos, they've seen people cooking and showing and demonstrating, and it's very fun for them to do it as well. That's really how we started with Jem as well. So, set up the camera, put the tripod in the kitchen and say, okay, we're going to learn how to make squidding pasta or whatever it is that your kid wants to make. And you'll find that they might be much more into it if they think that they're teaching it to somebody else. Just a trick, a way that you can do. But teach them how to make I guarantee if you do this, you're going to have a good time. Yes, you're going to make a mess in the kitchen, but it's all good. A couple of years ago during the pandemic, my son, we've had Jake from Zeus Fitness on, and they decided to do a thing. It was all online, and they told us what ingredients to get ahead of time. They gave us like 2 weeks notice, and then everybody got online on a Saturday morning. It was all these people in all these boxes on a Zoom call, and a person showed us how to make bagels. And so my husband and I were standing by to help and, be sous chefs, but my son basically made the bagel, and we were watching all of these young people on the screen making bagels. It was such a good time. Ours were gluten-free bagels. They weren't that good. Can I tell you? They were like rocks. But it was a fun time and we enjoyed it. I think we decided afterwards that we would just buy gluten-free bagels from now on, but I remember it fondly, and I think you will have a good time. So a fun thing to do. An important life skill. And while you're doing it, teach about nutrition. I don't know where or when, because it wasn't my mother, but it was drilled into my head about having the plate be equal, that you really want to think of the plate being in 3 different sections, and that there is a carb, that there is a vegetable, and that there is a protein. And then there's just a little bit of room to squeeze a fat onto. And for breakfast, you put the fruit instead of the vegetable. That was how I was taught to think of nutrition. And I thought of that whenever I was feeding my child, that if I'm going to prepare a meal, that there has to be a carb, there has to be a vegetable, and there has to be a protein. and that none of them is wildly bigger than the other, you know? And I know when I talk about that, sometimes people, they go, what? What is this thing? My husband was like, I never heard this before. I have no idea about this. Because he would prepare a meal for our son, and I would go, where's the vegetable? And he's like, is that a requirement? And yes, it is. We want him to grow. There needs to be a vegetable on that plate. And I know sometimes that gets hard when they're teenagers, but you know, so they like to have the carrots with the ranch. Okay, put the carrots on, right? That's a vegetable. It counts. And if they eat that every day until they turn orange, don't worry about it, right? It's a vegetable. It's good for their intestines. Okay, so teach that to them too. Okay, number 4, how to do laundry. Okay, I'm going to give the disclaimer here that I'm still working on this one with my son. Because I placed other things above this, he absolutely can do laundry. I don't want anybody writing and going, what's wrong with you? He can do laundry. I still don't require him to do his own laundry because it was more important to me that he do his schoolwork, and he's on the dean list, so I stick by that. That's a good choice. But he knows how to do it. He just hasn't gotten to some of the more advanced things of laundry that I really want him to get to soon. But you start with the basics, right? And really, there is no age that's too early. You can have a 3-year-old put their laundry into the laundry basket and slide the laundry basket to the washer dryer, and they can sort clothes. Although Traven tells me that sorting colors is a thing of the past, that with the new washer dryers that we don't have to do that anymore. Traven told this to me, and it was earth-shattering to me, and I still can't do it. I still separate things, but apparently you don't have to. I can't get my head wrapped around that. And I think it's a good thing to have our kids sort laundry and do colors and do things that are dark and do things that are white, right? And you can separate out towels, do whatever. But having them help you to do that at any age is a good floor to start. But then loading things into the washer, and then later when they have the skill to measuring the laundry soap, pushing the buttons, right? Knowing that, and you really got to teach this because, you know, when the thing is spinning, it's supposed to be locked, but we see that happen all the time, that it isn't locked, so that they don't ever open the door to the laundry unless the machine is completely stopped, and you teach them how to look for lights and feel. If it's completely stopped, then we open it. Safety issue, right? You can teach them how to take things out and put them in the dryer. More advanced skill would be hanging things up and folding things, right? They have those amazing Gap folder things that people have gotten for their kids, and the kids love them. I hate to fold things. But I see videos all the time of people who have taught their teenagers, and basically it's this, you can make one out of cardboard, but you can also buy one that's plastic, and it's this thing where they put the t-shirt on it and they go flap, 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 and they open it up and the t-shirt is all perfectly folded. I mean, you know, and they do this all the time at the Gap. That's why they call it the Gap folder. I'm sure you can find one on Amazon. Teach your kids how to do that, but then you teach them how to put the stuff away into the drawers, and then you teach them how to, you know, separate their things in their drawers and how to move things out that are winter clothes and put them someplace else and put the summer clothes in, right? If you're like me and you have a teenager, he's not a teenager anymore, I have to stop saying that, who's wearing flannel shirts and it's 100 degrees out, right? And he's like, well, it was what was first there available. We want to make sure that we teach them, oh no, you know, these are your summer clothes, so these are what you wear in the summer, and we move those to the front of the closet or to the, you know, in this drawer or whatever. Like, these are life skills that are going to be important to them somewhere down the road. And I don't know a single person as an adult that couldn't learn these basics, at least some of these. And the foldy thing, everybody, and I'm telling you, there's something about it that's very ASMR, very satisfying. They kind of love it. So get yourself one of that and teach them how to do the laundry. I know people that have done this really well that I'm in great envy of, that now their kids do all the laundry and ask, can I do the laundry? I need to focus a little bit more on this. Okay, how to call someone. All right. I do think that if your teen is on the autism spectrum, that you need to get them a phone. Please feel free to write to me and tell me how completely wrong I am, but I think Jem was 11 when we got him a phone, and people are like, man, that is really early and it's a big responsibility to have a phone. And because of things that have happened in our world, in our society, and things at school, I made the choice that it was more important to me that he have a phone, that he could get in touch with me, than all the other things. But if you're going to give them a phone, you've got to teach them the responsibility of the phone. And that a lot comes with that, right? You have to invest in a case that goes with the phone. I personally, I like the Otter boxes, and they have some that are knockoffs of Otter boxes that it has, like when I'm touching my screen, I'm not actually touching my screen. And I have thrown this has done everything except been run over by the car. This has fallen in a sink, you know what I mean? And my phone is absolutely pristine in it, and it comes in 3 pieces. They're a little bit pricey, but a lot less expensive than a phone. So you got to set them up for success and make sure that they have a case in which their phone can go through some pretty tough stuff before it gets destroyed. You could also buy insurance on the phone, although sometimes that ends up being more expensive than the phone. You know what I'm saying? Yes, somebody says, I just posted this on my Instagram, save phones with no internet browsers, and they just video call, and text, and they have different levels for different ages. Fabulous. Will you give us the link and we'll share that? Because you don't have to get the browser on the phone. There are ways to do that. But if you have a teen that has higher level reasoning skills, I also want to make a case for being able to do internet browsing so that they can Google things, that they can be looking things up. Yes, you're opening them up to being able to Google everything, and I would have a conversation with them about that. And I would make sure that there's a passcode on the phone, and I would check it every day. And I would say to your teen, or whatever age they are, when you give it to them, you would say, I paid for this phone. I am giving it to you to use because I think that you are responsible, and I want you to be able to use this to be able to save. But this is my phone, and every day I'm going to check this phone, right? And then if you have somebody who's really clever, you need to learn that there are safe spaces on phone where they can put an app in that is just a place where they tuck the things. Yes, I saw that in a junior high workshop. I've not come across it in life, but I hear that it's a thing. So there's that too. But I would set it up from the beginning that, it's yours and that you're paying for it, that you're allowing them to use it, and that you're going to check it on a regular basis. And then I would be really careful that we don't, if it becomes a thing that's about safety, don't use it as a punishment strategy to take it away from them, right? But if you see that they are using it in inappropriate ways, then maybe you switch to a phone that cannot do that, or if you're afraid of that, start with a phone that cannot do that, right? But you need to be able to teach them how to call and how to text. You need to help them to set up. It might just be that you're setting up the contacts in the beginning, but eventually, if they are at that skill, you want to teach them how to add contacts into their things so that they can call. You want to show them how to put an ICE number in so that in case of emergency, if there's someplace and somebody finds their phone, how to get a hold of somebody, how to do that. But the basics are how to call you, right? And if your kids if you're really struggling, there is something that's called a relay that isn't even a phone, where the only thing that they can do is call you. I don't know what the distance on it is, to be honest with you. So I'll have to look into that. But they need to be able to start to know how to call you, how to and when to call 911, and why not to call unless it's a real emergency. So you've got to have the conversation with them about what is a real emergency, right? But I would have all those conversations with them. Then you start to talk about what phone etiquette is. So in the beginning, it's just calling you, but later on, it's calling somebody that they don't know, and how to get to the point and ask for what they want to ask on the phone. I see so many young people right now that have no idea of phone etiquette. I would encourage you to have your teen, as you're working towards that, call people in your family and have conversations with them as practice for how to have a conversation with somebody on the phone, especially like if you're calling a business and you're asking a question about, hey, do you have this product, right? They need some practice doing that, and you talk it through them. Thank you. And Traven, if there's a way that you can then repost that, because I see they've got Protect Your Young Eyes, Best Phones for Kids, Ultimate Guide. Fabulous. I really appreciate that. Okay. But it is important that they know how to get on the phone and have a conversation with someone. And that there's a difference between how do we talk to a friend, right? That we have practice sessions where they're talking on the phone with their friends. They're mostly going to text their friends. But you need to be looking at the phone to see, are they texting properly? Are they doing anything? Is there anybody that they're talking to that's doing anything improper? You lay down the law about we never send pictures, and decide at what age you say, okay, it's okay to send pictures of food. But in the beginning, I say that we never ever send a picture. And if somebody sends you a picture, I want to see it, right? That was like the first year that he had the phone. But that we really lay down the law that nobody sends you nude pictures and you don't send nude pictures to anybody. And anybody who asks you for nude pictures, that you come and tell mom, right? Because that can get into a whole mess of other things. These are important skills that we need to be able to teach our kids. Okay, how to call someone. Number 6, how to pay for things. So this is a big thing, right? We want to start with money and taking them into stores and giving them like a $5 bill and having them get change and then teaching them, is it the right amount of change? How much was the thing and how much money did you get back, right? Start with cash money, but then by the time your child is a teen, feel free to judge me, but you need to open a bank account for them and you need to get them a debit card. You need to do that. And I'm amazed. Like, I don't think that we actually did that until he was 16, and I wish now that we'd done it at 14. We did it when he started having a job. He had an account before that was in his name that was a savings account, right? But that he didn't have access to. I was the only one that had access to it. And his birthday money and stuff would go in there. But I wish now that, 13, 14, that we had gotten him a bank account and started to work on what the bank account thing was before he had a job. But once he had a job, we were like, oh, he needs a bank account. How could we have missed this, right? And Dad took him and did the whole thing, and he got the bank account and he got the debit card. But you need to teach your kids how to use a debit card, how to know how much money is in their account, how to look up, and know what their balance is. My son now, I am not good at the taking a picture of and depositing a check from home. And my son has to walk me through it every time. Our kids get this so much more than we possibly can because they're better technologically. But you need to go through all of that in person, buying, and then you need to have the important conversations about paying for things online. And oh my gosh, this is a never-ending thing. I am going to admit that a couple of years ago, I purchased something on Facebook. There was an ad that came up because I was looking for these loungers that are a circle and that they come apart, right? And I was looking at them and they were like $1,000. And there was one of those ads on Facebook, we're selling them for $150. And it was just low enough that I was like, this is a great deal, but just high enough that I was like, oh, that's not a scam. And paid for it, and what came in the mail 3 months later was it was like a Tupperware top lid. That's what came from my $150. And I had to learn the hard way, right? But you want to teach your kids about what are safe sites to buy stuff from, that kind of thing, because it will end up being important. How not to pay for things in apps, all of those lessons. Facebook user says, I agree about the internet browser. Some of these companies have different levels. As they get older, they get more options. I love that. They said, I was just thinking about the bank account for my kiddo to budget groceries and his snacks. I do think it's a really important thing to do. And there is a way, most banks have a thing where the kid has the account, but that you can have some oversight so that you can sort of be watching and you want to talk to them about, you can't take out more than what you have in there. they, I think they have a tendency to get it more than we think they will because it's tied to them getting what they want. It becomes a big interest to them. Mike Hipple, how are you? He says, FYI, parents, the child's school should be teaching life skills no matter how low or high functioning they are. And yes, Mike, I know that they should and that they're supposed to be, but I think it's summer and we need to be on top of this too. And I'm going to say this and it's going to sound wrong, but some of this comes with value judgments too. And I don't know how everybody else feels about this, but I think it's important for me as a parent to teach my values about, for instance, how to pay for things alongside of the hardcore facts, and they're not going to get that at school. So I agree with you, Mike. They absolutely should. They don't always, but we still need to do it too. I got to move this along because we're running out of time. But how to pay for things. It's not just sticking the card in the thing. It's a whole bunch of things. And you also need to talk about, do you keep the receipt? Do you throw the receipt away? What's your particular thing? How advanced do you want to be with bookkeeping? All of that. Talk about those things. Okay, number 7, how and when to disclose. This is a very important topic, and it's going to depend on your beliefs and the age and the sort of abilities that your teen or adult has, but there is a time and a place to disclose, and there is a way to disclose. And what your preference is of how you do it and what your child's preference of how they do it all need to be taken into account. But I think it's a conversation that's worth having, that you are going to find that at different phases in their life, they're going to feel differently about it. But let's talk about, if you are someplace and the police come, how do you disclose your diagnosis to them? Because you probably are going to want to, right? If you have met a friend and you're starting to be better friends, how and when do you disclose? If you're going on a date with somebody, how and when to disclose? It's going to be so personal, but I really think that all of these things are important conversations to have with your child, teen, adult, to help them to empower them to know that it's up to them how and when they do it, but different circumstances are going to warrant different things. Yeah. Number 8, how to order food. Now, I know this seems like a really silly thing, except that some of our kids have dietary restrictions, and in their life, they are going to go and order food. And it's going to be important. It's part of their sustenance. It's like, being able to cook 3 things, right? And ordering food comes in lots of different ways now. It's not cut and dried. You're not always sitting at a chair and a waitress comes up, right? Sometimes we went to a sushi restaurant and it was a thing where you got to push buttons and you order the food and it comes out on a conveyor belt, right? My son had to show me how to do it because I was like, we go to Disneyland and you got to order it on an app ahead of time, right? So in some ways, it's probably going to be easier for our kids, but we want to teach them how to do it. And by the way, this includes being able to order things on apps that get delivered to your home and understand, is that costing you extra? Understanding how to tip, all of those things. When we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I know it was different for everybody, but I didn't go to a grocery store for almost 2 years. I only ordered and I had stuff delivered, and there was a different modality for each one. If I ordered from Costco, there was a whole rigmarole that was to it then, and you couldn't order from Trader Joe's. You had to go on a dumpling app and order from Dumpling, and they would send somebody to Trader Joe's for you. So it was a whole other life skill. And my phone is still filled with all the different places that I would order food from. And I noticed at a certain point, I was like, wait a second, I'm the only one who's ordering the food and nobody else in my house knows how to do this. And that's not a good plan. So work through, I love now that my son has all these apps on his phone that he has food delivered, and he loves to eat out. So he goes to all these different places. But it's a continuum. You have to start by going to like a fast food place, go through the drive-through, right? And have them order through the drive-through. And that's a whole other thing, right? But they need to be able, this is like one of those just core life skills that they need to be able to have and empower them to be able to get it the way they want it, because that's part of ordering the food too, and how to deal with it if the food comes in and it's not what they ordered. That's another additional part of it. Super duper important. And when they get this piece, the autonomy that they have and the pride that they have in it will be well worth the effort that you had to put in to teach it to them. Okay, number 9, teaching them how to use transportation. And this covers everything. Do they have the Uber app? Do they know how to use it? Do they know safe protocol when, when the Uber pulls up, that their thing on the thing matches, that they don't just yell their name and they get into the car, right? We've seen terrible things happen. Do they know how to, get on a bus? If you're someplace where there are subways, do they know how to do that? Do they know, if you've gone on any trips, that's an ideal time to talk about this. We used to go in airports when he was like 9, 10, 11. And after a certain point, I would talk him through like the first flight, and I would go, okay, we're going to look for the screens that are arrivals and departures. Which one are we doing? Right? And I would go, okay, which city are we going to? Look it up. What gate is it? Now look, where are the signs for Terminal A? Okay, now we're headed towards Terminal A, but what gate number is it? Right? So the first time I would talk him through each step of it, but then we'd get to the next connection and I would go, take us to where we have to go. And I would, sometimes we would walk down the wrong hallway, right? But, if we had time, we would go through all that. So my son can do any airport now, and he's great at it. And it also, I saw transferred to subways, that he knows now how to orient and go, where's the map? Where's the sign? Am I going north? Am I going south? Like, he's got all of that because we did all of that in the airport. But we also have to teach, like I said, the buses and the subways and all of those things so that they can use transportation and understand how to use that. Here in our city, we have, if you're in downtown Los Angeles, you can rent a bicycle, and there's a whole process for that. So wherever you are and the transportation that's available, if you're someplace where it's not going to be Ubers, but it's taxis, understanding all of that, really important, because they're going to get here, there, and everywhere. Okay. But I want to leave these last 3 minutes to talk about number 10, which I do believe is the most important thing, which is how to say no. And this covers everything, right? That this covers, people who are trying to take advantage of our kids and, harm them, that somebody is touching them inappropriately, to say no, but it covers other things too. That if someone is saying, here, eat this, and they don't want to be able to say, no, thank you, right? It's really teaching boundaries. That this is hard, right? Because sometimes it's you asking them to do something that they don't want to do, and it's for their own good, right? That if you really think about it, when you're asking them to get up in the morning and get dressed and go to school, it's an ask, because it's really hard to force them, right? And they have the right to say no. And I think it's important to teach them that you have the right to say no, but then quantify all of it, and that there are consequences if you're going to say no to going to school. Here is what the consequences are. Because I used to say to my son, if you're sick and you need to stay home from school, and you're saying no to me, and when I say get up and go to school, and you're saying no, then the criteria is that you need to be sick, but if you don't feel well and you don't want to go to school, that's fine. But then we're going to treat you like a sick person all day long, which means you have to stay in your bedroom. There's no phone, there's no video games, there's no talking to friends, and then he goes, I might be feeling better. You see what I'm saying? But this does include teaching no when it's something that they truly don't want to do. And we have to get respectful as the adults in their life who are trying to get them ready for everything that adulthood comes with, that we do need to start listening to their no. Sometimes they're going to say no to something, and we need to investigate and say, okay, but I just need to understand why you're saying no to this. And some of our kids don't have the ability to verbalize that, right? And it can be very, very difficult. But if we teach them, I would rather teach my teen how to say no and respect the no and me deal with the consequence than not teaching them the no. Does that make sense? Because they need to know, first of all, that they can say no, And second of all, they need to know that we are the people that they can trust no matter what. And if somebody is sitting in front of me and they don't have the ability to explain to me why they're saying no, but they are saying a hard no, I want to be on their side. And you know what? Sometimes there are consequences for that. And if they're saying no to going to school, I want to say that there is a reason why they're saying no to school. And maybe we need to deal with that consequence and figure out why the no, I don't want to go to school. And we got to figure that piece out, because they should want to go to school. And if they don't, something is not right there. But let's not negate the no. Let's teach them to say no. Let's encourage them to say no. Let's respect the no, right? That doesn't mean that, again, that there are no consequences to the no. But school's pretty important. And if your child doesn't go to school, eventually the truant officer is going to come. But I got to say to you, that is not the worst thing that can happen in life. The worst thing that can happen is your child doesn't feel safe, and that they don't feel like they can be safe with you, and they feel like you're not listening to you when they feel unsafe. That's probably the worst thing that could happen. So I'm asking you to teach them to say no, to respect the no. Don't just let it go. Investigate, figure out why the no, but respect the no. Don't poo-poo it. And you know, I think this is hard, and there are so many different, this isn't a black and white issue. There's tons of gray here. But one of the things that I think is super important is that we listen to the adults on the spectrum who are able to communicate, and they say a lot of different things, a lot of different things. But one of the things that I feel like I have heard completely that so many people have said was, I didn't feel like I had choices. I think we can do better. I think we can do better than that. We should be teaching our kids that there are choices. Sometimes the choice is, you know, you can go to school or you can stay at home and not have video games. Like, that's a choice, right? And I think it's a fair choice, right? But it's a choice, right? So that's part of how we can begin to teach no, but I think empower your child as much as you teach them yes and please and thank you. Teach them how to say no and reward them for saying no. And if you see your kids saying no to someone else, back them up and praise them for saying no. I'm going to evoke Joanne Laura, because she used to always say to her students, if they would say or do something that she loved, she would say, I love how you're thinking. I love how you're thinking right now. And I love when I see a person on the autism spectrum say no to something. So it could be grandma saying, would you like a cookie? And them saying no. And you go, I love how you just said no to that. If you don't want a cookie, you don't have to have a cookie, right? Praise them for sticking up for themselves and having boundaries. It's probably the biggest life skill that you could ever teach someone, is the ability to say no when it's appropriate. When to say no even when it's not appropriate. I'd rather have them learn that and say no and be empowered by that, and then work through behind the scenes, okay, what is the difficulty here? So that's my feeling on that. You can take it or leave it, but I think that that's an important life skill. All right, we are out of time. Let me remind you that tomorrow we're doing a Best of Autism Live. I think that on Friday we're doing a Stories from the Spectrum. Love that. We're going to be back on Monday. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I know that on Tuesday we're doing Ask Dr. Doreen, and I want to encourage you to find her podcast on Spotify right now, and it will soon be on Apple Podcasts. Remember, you can ask questions for Ask Dr. Doreen anytime during the week. Go to AskDrDoreen.com, click on the contact button. You can put as much as you want there. And please review Autism Live on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate that. All right, I'll see you soon. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.